Day 6 for the Come Follow Me study for this week, July 13th through the 19th. He trusted in the Lord God of Israel. 2 Kings 16 through 25. Saturday, July 18th, 2026, 2 Kings 24 and 25. 2 Kings 24. Jerusalem is besieged and taken by Nebuchadnezzar. 2 Kings 24:1. In his days Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant 3 years. Then he turned and rebelled against him. Babylon, the capital city of the region known as Babylonia, was located in today's southern Iraq. The scriptures indicate that Babylon was founded by Nimrod shortly after the flood. Over the course of millennia, Babylonia was inhabited and controlled by various people. By 750 BC, Babylonia came under the control of the Chaldeans, whose rise to power coincided with the decline of the Assyrian Empire. After the fall of Assyria, King Nebuchadnezzar II established the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire in Babylonia. It was during his reign that the kingdom of Judah was conquered and much of Jerusalem was destroyed, around 586 BC. The name Babylon appears numerous times throughout the scriptures, often as a symbol of wickedness and worldly corruption. Nebuchadnezzar was the son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon. Jehoiakim was the king of Judah. At the time that Nebuchadnezzar first laid siege to Jerusalem, Jehoiakim was paying tribute to Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, in return for protection against the Babylonians. The ploy did not work. At about 608 BC, Nebuchadnezzar was sent by his father against the rulers of several provinces that had revolted, and he took Carchemish and all that belonged to the Egyptians from the Euphrates to the Nile. 3 years later, about 605 BC, Jehoiakim revolted, and a mixed army of Chaldeans, Syrians, Moabites, and Ammonites was sent against him, who ravaged the country and took 3,023 prisoners, whom they brought to Babylon. Among the prisoners were probably Daniel and Ezekiel, who wrote the Old Testament books bearing their names. That same year, Nebuchadnezzar assumed the throne of Babylon upon his father's death. 2 Kings 24, 2-6. And the Lord sent against him bands of the Chaldees, and bands of the Syrians, and bands of the Moabites, and bands of the children of Ammon, and sent them against Judah to destroy it, according to the word of the Lord, which he spake by his servants the prophets. Surely at the commandment of the Lord came this upon Judah, to remove them out of his sight, for the sins of Manasseh, according to all that he did, and also for the innocent blood that he shed, for he filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, which the Lord would not pardon. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoiakim and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? So Jehoiakim slept with his fathers, and Jehoiachin, his son, reigned in his stead. The phrase slept with his fathers is a way of stating that Jehoiakim died. It may be taken in some instances to mean a peaceful kind of death, but 2 Chronicles 36:6 records that Jehoiakim was bound in fetters to be taken to Babylon, and Jeremiah 22:19 states that the king was given the burial of an ass, nor no burial at all, drawn and cast forth beyond the gates of Jerusalem. It seems possible that while being taken to Babylon as a captive, Jehoiakim rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar's forces a second time, causing those in charge to kill him and cast his body aside before continuing their journey. 2 Kings 24:7. And the king of Egypt came not again any more out of his land, for the king of Babylon had taken from the river of Egypt unto the river Euphrates all that pertained to the king of Egypt. Not many years after Assyria had conquered the northern kingdom of Israel and taken the 10 tribes captive, the empire began to crumble. In the southern part of the empire, the Chaldees and the Babylonians were in the ascendancy, and they quickly seized power from the toppling Assyrians. In 609 BC, King Nabopolassar, in league with Egypt and Media, attacked and conquered Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. Babylonia became the ruling empire and set about to consolidate its position. Like Assyria before it, Babylonia used a combination of conquest and deportation of whole populations to do so. Nebuchadnezzar inherited the empire when his father Nabopolassar died. Under Nebuchadnezzar's leadership, Babylon reached the summit of its greatness and glory. Using slaves from various areas of the empire, Nebuchadnezzar inaugurated a massive building program and quickly made Babylon the greatest city in the world. Through conquest and commerce, the wealth of the world flowed into Babylon's treasury, and Nebuchadnezzar used that wealth to glorify the city. The descriptive phrases found in the prophetic writings of the Old Testament describe Babylon's glory. Daniel called it this great Babylon. Jeremiah described it as the praise of the whole earth. Isaiah said it was the Lady of Kingdoms, the glory of kingdoms, and the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency. Ancient historians spoke in detail of Babylon and showed that such descriptive phrases were not exaggerations. As so often happens, Babylon's wealth and glory were accompanied by moral decay, wickedness, and iniquity. So terrible were the morals of Babylon that the very name became the symbol for worldliness, spiritual wickedness, and Satan's kingdom. It is the great whore, the mother of harlots and abominations. The secular historians give information that helps to explain why the prophets used the name Babylon to symbolize the antithesis of godliness. Will Durant wrote that even Alexander, who was not above dying of drinking, was shocked by the morals of Babylon. Fallows also described the great city. Babylon, as the center of a great kingdom, was the seat of boundless luxury, and its inhabitants were notorious for their addiction to self-indulgence and effeminacy. Q. Curtis asserts that nothing could be more corrupt than its morals, nothing more fitting to excite and allure to immoderate pleasures. The rites of hospitality were polluted by the grossest and most shameless lusts. Money dissolved every tie, whether of kindred, respect, or esteem. The Babylonians were very greatly given to wine and the enjoyments which accompany inebriety. Women were present at their convivialities, first with some degree of propriety, but growing worse and worse by degrees. They ended by throwing off at once their modesty and their clothing. On the ground of their awful wickedness, the Babylonians were threatened with appropriate punishment. Through the mouths of the prophets, and the tyranny with which the rulers of the city exercised their sway was not without a decided effect in bringing on them the terrific consequences of the divine vengeance. Nor in the whole range of literature is there anything to be found approaching to the sublimity, force, and terror with which Isaiah and others speak on this painful subject. Abraham foresaw that Israel would be in bondage in Egypt and not have an inheritance in the promised land because, as the Lord revealed, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. The Canaanites, of whom the Amorites were a part, had not yet ripened in iniquity. By the time Joshua led the Israelites into Canaan, however, the Canaanites had become so degenerate that the Lord commanded that they be utterly destroyed. Of all peoples who ought to have understood that wickedness will be punished, it should have been the people living in the southern kingdom of Judah. They had seen the northern kingdom fall to Assyria, and they themselves had been miraculously delivered from the Assyrian army because they had heeded the words of Isaiah. God has clearly taught that he is no respecter of persons. He does not show favoritism. All who are obedient receive blessings. All who are ripened in iniquity lose their blessings. As Nephi told his brothers, the Canaanites were destroyed because of their iniquity, and if the Jews were no better, they faced a similar fate. But Judah did not learn the lesson. After Assyria was overthrown, the pressures on the southern kingdom lessened, while the new empire, Babylon, consolidated its power. Like her northern sister, Judah was soon deeply entrenched in idolatry and wickedness. So much so that the Lord said that King Manasseh seduced them, Judah, to do more evil than did the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel. In that state, Judah lost the promise of divine protection, and Babylon, hungry for power, stood waiting to conquer the world. The Lord sent his prophets to warn the people of their impending destruction. Jeremiah, Lehi, and many others were called, but their warnings fell on deaf ears. Under King Josiah, one last attempt was made at reformation, but it was short-lived, and soon The people had forsaken Jehovah. Political rulers looked to Egypt for protection and power against Babylon's growing influence, even though Jeremiah had again and again warned Judah not to trust in Egypt for deliverance. Thus the stage was set for a second tragedy among the people of Israel. The events of the 20 or so years that followed Josiah's reign saw the fruits of Judah's disobedience brought to maturity. Judah was caught in the power struggle between Egypt and Babylonia. Jehoahaz succeeded his father and reigned 3 months. Then he was taken to Egypt, and his half-brother, who was given the throne name of Jehoiakim, ruled as an Egyptian vassal. He exacted heavy taxes from his people for Egypt. Babylon defeated the Egyptians at Carchemish in 605 BC. Judah became a vassal of the new conquerors. Jehoiakim paid tribute to Babylon for 3 years before unsuccessfully attempting to free his people. The rebellious king was killed, and many of his people were exiled to Babylon. The king's wickedness had accelerated the deterioration of the people of Judah. He was succeeded by his young son Jehoiachin, who continued to resist the Babylonians, but was defeated within 3 months. 2 Kings 24, 8-9. Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months, and his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. Jehoiachin, also spelled Jehoiachin, was the son and heir of Jehoiakim. Like his father in many respects, he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. Kyle and Delitzsch commented on the extent of his evil deeds. Ezekiel describes him not only as a young lion, who learned to pray and who devoured men, like Jehoahaz, but also affirms to him that he knew the deceased men's widows, i.e. ravished them and destroyed their cities. That is to say, he did not confine his deeds of violence to individuals, but extended them to all that was left behind by those whom he had murdered, to their families and possessions. 2 Kings 24, 10-13. At that time the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, the king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon, he and his mother and his servants and his princes and his officers. And the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. Verse 13 records that Nebuchadnezzar carried out thence from the temple all the treasures. Evidence indicates, however, that the temple of Solomon was spoiled 3 times during Nebuchadnezzar. The first time was when Jerusalem was attacked and Jehoiakim was taken to Babylon. The vessels removed at this time were those that Belshazzar profaned, as recorded in Daniel 5:2, and that Cyrus, the Median Persian king, permitted the Jews to carry back to Jerusalem when they were released. When Nebuchadnezzar came against Jerusalem a second time, as recorded in Isaiah, he also took spoil. The third time was when Nebuchadnezzar pillaged the temple under Zedekiah, the last king of Judah. Many of the people of Judah are carried captive into Babylon. 2 Kings 24, 14-16. And he carried away all Jerusalem, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poorest sort of the people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land. Those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Jehoiachin, Josiah's grandson, had reigned in Judah for only 3 months when Nebuchadnezzar attacked Jerusalem for the first time, eventually conquering it around 598 BC. Jehoiachin's surrender to the Babylonians suggest a pragmatic decision to save the city from destruction. The Babylonians took many wealthy, educated, and skilled people back to Babylon as captives to disable Judah from being able to wage war. The prophet Ezekiel was among these exiles. The Babylonians also took with them most of the king's riches and the temple's sacred and precious items. Zedekiah becomes king in Jerusalem. 2 Kings 24:17. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Jehoiachin was likewise exiled, and his uncle, who took the throne named Zedekiah, ruled in his stead. After King Jehoiachin was taken captive to Babylon, his uncle Mattaniah was made king of Judah by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar changed Mattaniah's name, which means gift of Yahweh, to Zedekiah, meaning Yahweh is my justice or righteousness. This was perhaps Nebuchadnezzar's way of implying that what he was doing to Jerusalem was just. Regardless, Nebuchadnezzar's appointing of a new king and renaming him demonstrated that the kingdom was under Babylonian control. 2 Kings 24:18 and 19. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. During the last years of Judah's existence, many prophets were sent to warn the people. Lehi, the first prophet recorded in the Book of Mormon, was one of these prophets sent by the Lord to warn the Jews that they must repent or face the destruction of Jerusalem. The Lord warned Lehi to flee Jerusalem with his family before the city was destroyed. The Lord then led them to the promised land in the western hemisphere. Zedekiah rebels against Babylon. 2 Kings 24:20. For through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Since neither Zedekiah nor his people heeded the warning voice of God's messengers, the destruction of Jerusalem was assured. Zedekiah pledged loyalty as a vassal king, but in time found resistance among the people. A spirit of nationalism rose against the weight of foreign servitude. Revolt in Babylon caused the withdrawal of the caretaker forces from Judah, and a growing patriotic feeling among the people brought Zedekiah to seek the support of Egypt in rebellion against the power of the north. 2 Kings 25. Nebuchadnezzar again besieges Jerusalem. 2 Kings 25, 1-6. And it came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And on the 9th day of the 4th month the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And the city was broken up, or in Hebrew penetrated and opened up. And all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate, between two walls, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about, and the king went the way toward the plain. And the army of the Chaldees pursued after the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho, and all his army were scattered from him. So they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon, to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. Josephus recorded an interesting story about Zedekiah and hearkening to the prophets. Now as to Hezekiah himself, while he heard the prophet Jeremiah speak, he believed him and agreed to everything as true, and supposed it was for his advantage. But then his friends perverted him, and dissuaded him from what the prophet advised, and obliged him to do what they pleased. Ezekiel also foretold in Babylon that what calamities were coming upon the people, which when he heard, he sent accounts of them unto Jerusalem. But Zedekiah did not believe their prophecies for the following reason. It happened that the two prophets agreed with one another in what they said, as in all other things, that the city should be taken, and Zedekiah himself should be taken captive. But Ezekiel disagreed with Jeremiah, and said that Zedekiah should not see Babylon, while Jeremiah said to him that the king of Babylon should carry him away thither in bonds. And because they did not both say the same thing as to this circumstance, He disbelieved what they both appeared to agree in, and condemned them as not speaking truth therein, although all the things foretold him did come to pass according to their prophecies, as we shall show upon a fitter opportunity. 2 Kings 25:7. And they slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him with fetters of brass, and carried him to Babylon. With matters quieted at home, the Babylonians returned with swift vengeance against Judah. Jerusalem was besieged, and other fortresses in the land of Judah were attacked, and were reduced to rubble. The siege against Jerusalem continued after the rest of the nation had fallen, and conditions during this time were almost beyond imagination. An eyewitness recorded the following description. How is the gold become dim? Now is the most fine gold changed. The stones of the sanctuary are poured out in the top of every street. The precious sons of Zion, comparable to fine gold, how are they esteemed as earthen pitchers, the work of the hands of the potter. Even the sea monsters draw out the breast. They give suck to their young ones. The daughter of my people is become cruel, like the ostriches in the wilderness. The tongue of the sucking child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask bread, and no man breaketh it unto them. They that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. They that be slain with the sword are better than they that are slain with hunger. For these pine away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the field. The hands of the pitiful woman have sodden their own children. They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. As recorded in 2 Kings 25:7, both prophets were vindicated by subsequent events. After chastening Zedekiah for his unfaithfulness and treachery, Nebuchadnezzar commanded his sons and his friends to be slain, while Zedekiah and the rest of the captains looked on, after which he put out the eyes of Zedekiah and bound him and carried him to Babylon. And these things happened to him, as Jeremiah and Ezekiel had foretold to him, that he should be caught and brought before the king of Babylon, and should speak to him face to face, and should see his eyes with his own eyes. And thus far did Jeremiah prophesy. But he was also made blind, and brought to Babylon, but did not see it, according to the prediction of Ezekiel. The biblical account reports that Nebuchadnezzar's army slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. We learn from the Book of Mormon that one of Zedekiah's sons, Mulek, survived and escaped the destruction of Jerusalem. The Lord directed Mulek and others to the Promised Land in the Western Hemisphere sometime after Lehi and his family left Jerusalem. Mormon recorded that Zedekiah's son Mulek lived and went to the land now known as America, where he and his people settled in the land north of where Lehi and his posterity settled. This group was discovered by Mosiah and his small group of Nephites. Latter-day Saints generally refer to them as Mulekites, although they are not called that in the Book of Mormon itself. Some have seen Ezekiel 12:14 as a prophetic hint of Mulek's escape. Zedekiah is captured, Jerusalem and the temple are destroyed, and most of the people of Judah are carried into Babylon. 2 Kings 25:8-12. And in the 5th month, on the 7th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem. And he burnt the house of the Lord, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and every great man's house burnt he with fire. And all the army of the Chaldees that were with the captain of the guard brake down the walls of Jerusalem round about. Now the rest of the people that were left in the city, and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon, with the remnant of the multitude, did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. But the captain of the guard left of the poor of the land to be vine dressers and husbandmen. In response to Zedekiah's rebellion, Babylonian armies tore down the walls of Jerusalem, burned the temple, and carried away many of the remaining people to Babylon. These events, along with the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel almost 150 years earlier, were part of the scattering of Israel. The ancient Israelites were scattered because they rejected Jehovah and were not faithful to their covenants with him. This scattering happened over time, as the Israelites were conquered by other nations and carried away into captivity. Even more tragically, many of them lost their sense of identity as God's covenant people. 2 Kings 25, 13 through 21. And the pillars of brass that were in the house of the Lord, and the bases, and the brazen sea that was in the house of the Lord, did the Chaldees break in pieces, and carried the brass of them to Babylon. And the pots and the shovels and the snuffers, i.e., the devices for extinguishing, and the spoons, and all the vessels of brass wherewith they ministered, took they away. And the firepans and the bowls, and such things as were of gold, and of silver, the captain of the guard took away. The 2 pillars, 1 sea, and the bases which Solomon had made for the house of the Lord. The brass of all these vessels was without weight. The height of the 1 pillar was 18 cubits, and the chapiter upon it was brass, and the height of the chapiter 3 cubits, and the wreathen work and pomegranates upon the chapiter round about, all of brass. And like unto these had the 2nd pillar with wreathen work. And the captain of the guard took Seraiah the chief priest, and Zephaniah the 2nd priest, and the 3 keepers of the door. And out of the city he took an officer that was set over the men of war, and 5 men of them that were in the king's presence, which were found in the city, and the principal scribe of the host, which mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land that were found in the city. And Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took these, and brought them to the king of Babylon, to Riblah. And the king of Babylon smote them, and slew them at Riblah, in the land of Hamath. So Judah was carried away out of their land. These verses record that Nebuchadnezzar put to death the leaders of Judah's revolt against him. All the healthy people were then carried out of the land of Babylon, but the poor of the land were permitted to remain and were given work as vine dressers and husbandmen, planters and herdsmen. Bible historian Harry Thomas Frank wrote of the demise of this people in their city. In July of 587, Zedekiah sought to surrender the city and end the suffering. Once before, 10 years ago, the Babylonians had treated Jerusalem with what was for those days extraordinary mercy. Not now. This time they meant to be done with the center of intrigue. Food ran out, so did the king. In the evening of the day, Babylonian soldiers poured into the city. Zedekiah and some of his men fled, making for the Jordan and hoping to escape to safety in the desert. They got as far as Jericho before they were captured. Nebuchadnezzar was in Syria at his headquarters. There the Judahite and his sons were taken. No more Hebrew kings were to live in luxurious exile as Jehoiachin had done. With dispatch, Zedekiah was brought into the presence of the great king of Babylon. His sons were slain in his presence, and then he was blinded and dragged off northward in chains. Jerusalem had meanwhile passed into Babylonian hands. What the Babylonians found in the city and what they did to what they found does not require a very fertile imagination. At the same time, somewhat surprisingly, there seems not to have been any prior decision as to what should be done with the city when it fell. For a month, further horrors and indignities were visited upon the sorely tried people, who must have believed that they were indeed abandoned by God himself. Then Nebuzaradan, chief of Nebuchadnezzar's bodyguard, and thus a person of considerable importance, arrived in Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan was not a herald of good news. Upon his orders, high officials of the state, and with them certain leading persons in various professions, were taken to Riblah, the Syrian headquarters, where they were executed. Others were herded together to be taken into exile in Babylonia. Jeremiah 52:29 mentions the number 832, but this doubtless refers only to adult males and likely only to inhabitants of Jerusalem. The number of deportees was much larger. Finally, the walls of Jerusalem were leveled, and what remained after a year and a half of siege and a month of occupation and terror brought by Nebuzaradan was put to the torch. Not for the last time smoke hung heavily over the Judean hills and blew gently across the Mount of Olives toward the wilderness near the Jordan. But on that day, in the heat of the summer of 587, it rose from Judah's funeral pyre. While the scattering of Israel included invasion and deportation, The Lord saved some of the righteous from destruction, such as Lehi and his family. In his wisdom, the Lord ultimately used the scattering of Israel to bless the nations of the earth. God also promised that he would gather scattered Israel in the last days. President Russell M. Nelson taught that the latter-day gathering of Israel is an essential prelude to the second coming of the Lord and the most important work in the world. Gedaliah left to govern, the remnant is slain. 2 Kings 25, 22-25. And as for the people that remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left, even over them he made Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, ruler. And when all the captains of the armies, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had made Gedaliah governor, there came to Gedaliah to Mizpah even Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kara, and Sariah the son of Tehumeth the Netophathite, and Jezaniah the son of a Machathaite, they and their men. And Gedaliah swore to them and to their men, and said unto them, Fear not to be the servants of the Chaldees. Dwell in the land, and serve the king of Babylon, and it shall be well with you. But it came to pass in the 7th month that Ishmael the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the seed royal, came, and 10 men with him, and smote Gedaliah that he died, and the Jews and the Chaldees that were with him at Mizpah. The remnant flee to Egypt. 2 Kings 25-26. And all the people, both small and great, and the captains of the armies arose and came to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldees. Nebuchadnezzar appointed Gedaliah a Jew to be governor of Judea, whereupon Ishmael, a zealous Jew of the royal family, undertook to slay Gedaliah for his complacency with the foreigners. Josephus recorded that Ishmael compelled the Jews remaining in the Holy Land to accompany him to the land of the Amorites. Before their arrival there, however, another Jewish patriot, Johanan, angry with Ishmael for slaying Gedaliah, rescued his countrymen from Ishmael's grasp and took them to Egypt to battle. This move was contrary to the counsel of Jeremiah, who still resided in Judea, and who urged Johanan and the other Jews to do the same. They refused, and they compelled Jeremiah and his scribe, Baruch, to flee to Egypt with them. Jehoiachin is shown favor in Babylon. 2 Kings 25-27-30. And it came to pass in the 7th and 30th year of the captivity of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, did lift up the head of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, out of prison. And he spake kindly to him, and set his throne above the throne of the kings that were with him in Babylon, and changed his prison garments, and he did eat bread continually before him all the days of his life. And his allowance was a continual allowance given him of the king, a daily rate for every day, all the days of his life. After a long imprisonment in Babylon, Jehoiachin, former king of Judah, was released from prison by Evil-Merodach, son of Nebuchadnezzar. From that time until his death, the former king was kindly treated by his Babylonian overlords. The face of Judah, a spiritual as well as national tragedy. The period between the death of Josiah and the final deportation of the Jews to Babylon could be described as the dying time of the kingdom of Judah. The cancer of idolatry was too deep in the hearts of the people for the surgery undertaken by Josiah to have any great effect. After Josiah, Judah began to deteriorate at an even greater rate than before. Nonetheless, spiritual surgeons were sent to proclaim the cure. And the Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending his warnings, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. Indeed, the nearer the end came, the more voices were lifted up. The Book of Mormon states that by the time of Zedekiah, 11 years after the death of Josiah, there came many prophets prophesying unto the people that they must repent. Jeremiah appeared to have been the chief of these prophets. His ministry spanned the whole period, but he was assisted by others. Zephaniah was his immediate predecessor and his contemporary. Then came Obadiah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Lehi, all joining their voices with Jeremiah's. The Book of Mormon vividly portrays the feelings of the leaders of the people against these prophets. Their treatment of Lehi appears to have been typical. The Jews did mock him because of the things which he testified of them. They were angry with him, yea, even as with the prophets of old, whom they had cast out and stoned and slain, and they also sought his life, that they might take it away. Such was the spiritual condition of Judah just before their fall. How does that condition compare with ours today? Though the prophets were treated violently and murdered in the earlier part of this dispensation, in modern times the Lord's prophets are, for the most part, ignored by the world. Apathy brings less direct condemnation upon an individual than violence and murder, and yet the results of ignoring the modern prophets will be the same as they were for Judah. The world is rushing toward a spiritual disaster as great as any it has ever known. Once again, the prophets raised their voices, warning of impending disasters and pointing the way for national and personal salvation. And like Judah, the people of the world are unheeding. Fortunately, in this dispensation, spiritual Israel will begin to respond and will receive the promised blessings. Work through the following scripture chain and compare our times with those of Jehovah. Does our generation face a threat today? Will the anger of the Lord again be kindled in the last days? Why? Is there any hope for the world? Why? What will determine whether we will be able to pass through these times in safety?